Hello and welcome back to Doctor Who Series 13 Initial Thoughts. Today we're covering the penultimate chapter of Flux, Survivors of the Flux, written by Chris Chibnall. If you haven't already, please support the channel by hitting the subscribe button, turning on notifications, liking, commenting, and finding and following me on Twitter here. Last week, the Angels once again had the phone box, and now they have the Doctor, leaving Yaz and Dan stranded in 1901 with no access to the TARDIS. Based off the Next Time trailer, I was concerned that this was going to be a Dr. Light story, where Jodie was only going to have a minor role or not appear at all. Fortunately, right from the very first scene, we were shown that wasn't going to be the case. I think I wouldn't have had such a big problem with that idea, as it would have meant giving the rest of the cast more of a time to be in the spotlight, but considering how few stories Jodie has left, I don't think this would have been the right time. Something this particular episode is focused on is very much trying to wrap up as many of the questions as possible surrounding the Flux and the Division. We get an answer to who the mysterious woman was from episode 3. We get to understand why the Flux was created. We are given an option of how to stop it, and we learn more about the Doctor's role in the Division. Pretty much the only question at this point that hasn't been answered is who the Doctor was during her time at the Division. And I'll be honest, even though I've really enjoyed this season, it hasn't changed my mind on my thoughts on the concept of the Timeless Child and the missing Doctor's idea. Especially given that, based on the options we've been shown for how this story is likely to end, I'm not really keen on either. You've got the fairly safe Russell-style ending where the Doctor is able to reverse the process and restore the universe back to normal, or, since this episode has now established that there is indeed a multiverse, our universe that we've been following is destroyed, aside from a few elements and the Earth, and the Doctor takes them all to a brand new universe, which would be the more experimental option, but doesn't really sit right with me. And the likelihood is that the Doctor is ultimately going to either choose to give up those lost memories and accept that she's never going to know who she was, or she's going to get them back and it's not really going to matter. Which wouldn't be such a bad thing if both the Timeless Children and the New Year special ended with the Doctor seeming to come to terms with all of that and knowing who she is. And just going through it all again is quite an anticlimax, I suppose. There might be another ending that we haven't foreseen, but based on Chris Chibnall's past work as a writer, the fact that once this season is over, we still have 3 more episodes with Jodie, which are likely going to be more of a palate cleanser and to sort of ease people into the transition from one era of the show to another. I don't really see this going anywhere particularly interesting, but I'm going to give Chibnall the benefit of the doubt for now, because while it might from the outset seem like a pointless arc overall, what this arc has done has allowed the 13th Doctor and Yaz to really shine and give them a lot more material than prior to it. So it hasn't been completely unnecessary, if that is ultimately where we end up going with this arc. Slightly unnecessary, but not 100%, I'll give them that. Speaking of the Doctor's performance, I'm going to say that one of the best parts of this episode is the opening, where the Doctor is caught in a sea of weeping angels, and Jodie Whittaker gets to play dual roles as the Doctor and the voice of the angels. It's a really cool and creepy moment. An issue I've had with this story and quite a lot of Chibnall's work is a lot of awkward exposition to try and explain things. For example, we have Yaz watching a message left behind by the Doctor, which has to awkwardly be explained as something that the Doctor left with her off screen. It's kind of a similar problem Russell had, where the destination was so important and with so little time, the journey is sort of rushed and corners have to be cut. It's a nice scene between the Doctor and Yaz, and in particular I've got to say that this is probably one of Yaz's strongest stories, as she is a lot more confident than she was when we first met her in Woman 2 Fell to Earth, and she gets to take on the Doctor role while she and Dan, along with Professor Jericho, are stuck in the past. So I suppose it does work. If you're invested with these characters, then it's not an issue. But if you're not, the sort of lazy writing around it becomes a bit more obvious. It's probably why a lot of people enjoy The End of Time, despite its many narrative flaws. The subplot with Yaz, Dan and Jericho is easily the strongest part of the story. This Indiana Jones inspired adventure as they try and track down the answer to when the flux is supposed to begin in order to determine a means of stopping it. It's much better than, say, The Timeless Children, where they were mostly focused on the exposition and the subplot with the companions is just there out of necessity. Here they're actually playing an active part in the story. And we finally get an answer to Joseph Williamson's presence throughout the series, and he now plays a more active role, and what the significance is of his tunnels. A surprising return is the character of the Grand Serpent from episode 3. I didn't mention him in that video because I didn't expect him to show up again, and only serving as a means to develop Vinda and explain where he was and why he was in the position he was when we first met him in episode 1. Here he has for some reason decided to embed himself in the history of UNIT, and the character I assumed wasn't going to be the Brigadier, I was half right. He wasn't the Brigadier, but he was a founding member of UNIT. And on the subject of the Brigadier, he does make an off-screen cameo voiced by John Coleshaw, which was nice. We get a reference to the War Machines, and of course we have the return of Kate Stewart. I don't know if UNIT was absolutely necessary to appear in this story. They are all returning next week, with Kate leading the resistance against the invaders of Earth. If you're a bit skeptical on this possibility, then this episode does try and imply that it's going to sort everything out and bring it all together by having some of the plot points connect up, with Belle being reluctantly joined with the Lupari, Vinda meeting up with Diane, and of course the Sontarans attacking each group at the end of the episode. Overall, I think despite everything, it was a very enjoyable story, though the central conflict surrounding the Flux and the Division and the Timeless Child doesn't engage me all that much, and given the options of where it's ultimately going, it's not going to be a satisfying conclusion, but we'll have to wait and see. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time for the final chapter, The Vanquishers.